Well, welcome to another session. Today, I am going to talk about the importance of staying true to yourself. And the theme, or rather, the inspiration for today's session, has come really from a number of observations that I have made, both amongst very close friends, acquaintances, and friends of friends. Um, this is purely targeted towards men. Invert the principles and invert uh, the advice, and the same uh, conversation applies equally to women. In any case, I'm speaking to men today. Let's start by the whole concept of losing yourself in order to find yourself. My observation, and from my anecdotal, though limited, experience, has been that it takes a long time for most men to find themselves, to to come to who they are, to mature into their own manhood. For some reason, we like just imagine being um, on a farm, and you have these eggs that have just been laid, but they haven't hatched. Men generally hatch individually. For some, we take much longer. For others, we come out very quickly. In any case, uh, I think it's important to find yourself. Unfortunately, finding yourself really depends on first losing yourself. And I make a broad generalization when I speak to men, and I tend to target guys between the age of 18 and 35 because I found that that is where most men lose themselves. Today's session will emphasize partly why most men have midlife crisis and why in most of the cases the midlife crisis tends to occur amongst men who are in relationships, who are either married, who have just got out of a marriage, or who are either cohabiting with a woman. In many ways, one of the reasons for that is because these men were thrust into manhood, or the false ideology and the false concept of manhood, way too early. I usually speak to three groups of men, 18 years and younger. I call that my preschool group. 18 to 35, which is my main target group, I call that my undergraduate students. And then 35 and above, those are postgraduate, those are real men. Let me take that back. Those are men who have come into an age group where they should have an understanding about the most important part of what they need to make life meaningful. I focus on the middle group because I believe that's where I can have the most impact. And I guess to understand the importance of finding yourself, let me go through some of my tenets and why these tenets or principles are important and why they matter. If you're a guy between 18 and 35, here are some tenets. Firstly, you should not be in a committed mono relationship, an exclusive relationship with anyone until age 35. You can start considering such a relationship from age 30. 35 is my recommendation. You should not be married before age 35, and you should not consider marriage before age 30. You should not have kids or children before age 35, and preferably, if you start considering children, it should not be until age 30 as a minimum. You should not live with any woman before age 35. You should not consider living with a woman until age 30. When you decide to get married, assuming in this case you want to get married or you want to move in with someone for the purpose of getting married, that decision should not be made until you are at least 30. And should you choose to get married, do not have kids, at least for the first 3 years. So in many ways, wait till 30, then you can start making plans if you cannot wait till 35. My preference is always 35. Don't date single mothers before age 30. Don't consider marriage or a mono relationship with someone who's a single mother before age 35. Avoid women who have pets, dogs, and other commitments from previous relationships. Don't adopt a child until age 35. Now, why do I give such a very strict set of tenets? Well, the reason is because between age 18 and 35, you have 18 short years. The life expectancy for the average man today is 85 years. In the UK, it's roughly between 80 and 83. Split the difference is roughly 82. Depending on where you live in the UK, some places is 82, 83, goes up to 85. Split the difference, doesn't really matter. The point being, pre the 1940s, the life expectancy was roughly about 42, 45 years. On average, 42 years. People got married at 25, which meant they had roughly 15 to 17 years before they died. So you were marrying someone who was a virgin. You were starting out as a virgin. You didn't have that long ahead of you before you died. 15 to 17 years is not a long time. Today, if you wait until 35, you still have, almost 2/3 of your life ahead of you, depending on how healthy you are. Assuming you live to 85 and you get married at 35, you have 50 long years ahead of you. And that means that the strictness I apply to those 18 years is simply because I'm hoping to get you in the best place possible, financially, emotionally, spiritually, socially, culturally, in order for you to maximize the 50 years you have ahead of you. For some reason, young men today are pressured into marriage and relationships by their parents. Most parents, in my opinion, wrongly, keep saying things such as, I would love to see my grandkids before I die. Well, tough luck. You lived your life. You shouldn't put the burden on your sons or your daughters before they are ready for such a commitment. Now, I'm very specific and strict about those terms, those tenets, for a simple reason. 95% of your time between the age of 18 and 35 should be focused on yourselves. Your dreams, your goals, your ambitions, your education, your personal development, your career, becoming the best person you can be, maximizing that potential that is innate in each and every one of us. Pursuing mastery, trying to become exceptionally great in one thing or multiple things. Carving out a certain amount of investment paradigm and having a habit of saving so that you can build wealth. So you're doing two things. You're developing your human capital at the same time as you're trying to build financial wealth and financial capital. So that at 35, you've laid the foundations for what is required for the next 50 years of your life. 95% of your time focused on your dreams. 5%, therefore, on women. And that simply means I'm asking you to be um, intelligently irresponsible in relation to the major relational decisions that are necessary. I want you to be completely responsible financially. I want you to be responsible emotionally, spiritually. I want you to be responsible in making long term plans and sticking to those plans. I'd like you to be slightly irresponsible by not taking on responsibility either from a relationship or from a woman or from the burdens, the baggage that the woman brings from another relationship. Most women will tell you you need to grow up. So you see boys at 20 and 25 being told they need to grow up. Well, as far as I'm concerned, you're still a boy. At 25, you're still a boy, in my eyes. You're still maturing into a man. At 28, you're still a boy. At 30, I was still very immature in my overall outlook on life. For some reason, it took until I turned 32, 33, 34 for the scales to fall off my eyes. And so for that reason, I usually recommend to young men to procrastinate on certain decisions. The life expectancy is no longer 42, it's 85. So you don't have to get married at 25. You can delay that until 35. But one of the reasons I recommend for young men to delay the process is as follows. In order to become exceptionally great at anything, we know from research that you need to have dedicated at least 10,000 working hours, and those working hours have to be constant, never-ending growth and improvement. In other words, constant improvement after each hour. You have to dedicate 10,000 working hours. Between 18 and 22, we give you that for college. That's 5 years. That includes some time for you to play around and do whatever you would like to do during that early stage. In any case, that's education. From 23, the clock begins. We start to count. There are 2,000 working hours every year, which means 10,000 working hours will give you 5 years. You need 5 years to achieve 10,000 good working hours, to become proficient in a profession, in a career, in an area of gifting. So 23 plus 5 takes you to 28. But for most men, we don't do things in a straight line. We make mistakes along the way. We are distracted. We want to travel. We want to see the world. So I give you a 20% margin of error in that process. I say, well, maybe expecting 10,000 hours is not going to be a straight line. He's going to stumble and fall and stumble and fall. So let's give him a margin of safety of 20%. And that simply means you add an extra year. That takes you to 29. So from 23 plus 6 years takes you to 29. For whatever reason, we say we give you an extra 1 year just to consolidate. Now, for some guys, I usually say, well, maybe you've been so focused in your education in the first 5 years that you would like to travel the world. So we give you the first year off, 23 to 24, and we start counting from 24. 6 years, that takes you to 30. At 30 years old, you begin to come into your manhood. But what is sad is because you've been focused so intently on your profession or your career or building wealth or developing your area of gifting, that focus means that you haven't had the opportunity to try things and fail. Therefore, from 30, you have a profession that you're competent in, a profession that can serve as the foundation for raising a family, should you choose to. but you haven't failed. And therefore, I usually say between 30 and 35 is your 5 years to fail. The goals you have, the dreams you have, other than the security of a job, the ambitions you have 5 years to pursue those dreams. In many ways, that 5 years gives you another 10,000 hours of practice on anything you want to do. If you want to chase rabbits, great. If you want to build a ladder to the moon, give it a go. If you want to start a business, fantastic. But you have 5 years to try and fail, to see what you could be, to see whether you could become the kind of person deserving of that great life. So from 35, we've given you all the time you need to make yourself exceptionally great or good in a number of areas of life. And that simply means that if you choose at that point to start a family, you can go into that relationship with the understanding, with the confidence that you've actually found yourself. You lost yourself in the process and you found yourself. You have an understanding of who you are, what you like, what you do not like, what you like to eat, what you like to do during your spare time, what makes you happy, what makes you sad, what you do not like in terms of women. But in the same way, you have 18 years to sow your wild oats and try different things. Now, I've spent more than I would have wanted to in explaining those tenets. I did that for a reason. And this is where I begin today's session. The reason I went through that whole explanation is because most young men, you guys are like beating dogs. Many of you have unfortunately been microwaved into manhood. You haven't been slow cooked. You see, what I'm hoping to achieve by asking you to be intelligently and deliberate about delaying certain relational decisions is to allow yourself to be slow cooked in the oven, not to be microwaved. Most young men today are beating dogs. Most of you have been thrust into manhood way too early. You haven't discovered yourself. You haven't found yourself. You haven't failed at anything in life. And what tends to happen is with most young men is your relationship or your marriage is usually the first commitment you make. And whenever there is a sign of a crack in the relationship, you see that as a failure. And most of you do what most men do when we believe we're failing. We take the path of least resistance. The reason I said until 30, wait, and once you turn 30, wait, is you have 5 additional years to learn how to fail, how to develop almost a thick skin in relation to life. You develop a tolerance towards criticism. You develop an understanding that the world is not sunshine and rainbow. In many ways, you get to choose your poison during that period. You have some security in a skill you have, but there is no security in a job. You have 5 years to go for adventure, to discover something that gives your life a sense of meaning beyond a 9-to-5 job. You can fail in that 5-year period. And because you're not in a committed relationship with no dependence, with no woman or wife, looking at you every day and saying, when are you going to bring home the bacon? By 30, you've built up some wealth. Some of that wealth goes back into the soil, the seed, to allow you to sow your acorns to ensure you have an oak tree at 35. If for some reason the soil is poor, the weather is bad, there is no supply of water, in that 5-year period, at the end of the 5 years, you still have a skill set. So you can always go back to security. Most men, most young men, unfortunately, that move too early into relationships, skip what I believe are two important steps, 18 to 30 and 30 to 35. And unfortunately, they move very quickly from early 20s and late 20s into fatherhood and taking a job and working and effectively living up to the expectations of other people. By 40, 45, 46, 47, most of them go into a midlife crisis. Why? Because most of them are not really sure who they are. You know, who knows at 45, if you had a child, or if you were married at 25, at 45, who knows, maybe you have a child who is about 18 years old, assuming you had a child at 27. The 18 years, they leave the house, they leave the home, and suddenly the sense of meaning you once had, which is built around the family, starts to erode. Most men go into a sense of almost like the desert, not really sure about what life is about. In any case, I digress. Let me come back to the importance of today's session. I found most men to be beating dogs. You're told what to do by your wives. You're told what to do by your girlfriends. Many of you go into a relationship too early. You haven't discovered yourself. You don't have a sense of self-esteem. You're not aware of your self-worth because you have not achieved anything. You have nothing to show for it. Some of you have inherited money. You have come from a wealthy family. And although you have the wealth, there's something about the individual soul of a man that reminds him that his true worth does not come from what another man has produced. It comes from what he has endured and what he has overcome. So most of you feel as though you have to tolerate everything that is put before you. At the early age of 25 and 22 and 23, some of you go into marriage or move in with a woman. And from that point in time, she starts to dictate the terms of the relationship. It's all about control for the woman. And I don't necessarily think most women do this intentionally. Generally, most women believe that it is in their nature to nurture a man. You give a woman a house, she makes it into a home. You give a woman a seed, she produces an offspring. You give a woman ingredients for a meal, she produces a meal. Women have this innate desire and ability to make things better. Most of them, unfortunately, have not been taught or raised on the etiquettes of how to draw out the best in a man. So she starts to control. And that control is manifested in several ways. I've seen this amongst some old friends and some acquaintances, where she starts to dictate what can be done and what cannot be done in her perspective. Most of you give up your hobbies. Some of you actually sacrifice your friends. Some of you actually stop doing things you like. I have seen men who, for example, had motorbikes, impressive motorbikes, who were told you cannot use this motorbike any longer because we're now dating, you have to be more responsible. You can't play video games. You can't go to certain clubs, certain bars. You can't go to the gym on certain days. You have to stop smoking weed. You have to stop smoking completely because you can't smoke in the house. We have a child now, you have to be responsible. You can't, who knows, for those of you who like to go to strip joints, you can't go there. You can't do certain sports. It's all of the rules. And at 22, one of the things I learned was how much um, and how impressionable a young man can be. At that age, you haven't achieved anything. You're still fairly raw in terms of your potential. The woman, on the other hand, is at the peak of her potential in terms of beauty. Let me put it in a different way. As a woman ages or gets older, she has less of what a man wants, which is beauty, youth, attractiveness, and fertility. As a man gets older, we have more of what women want, which is resources. So the younger a woman is, the more she is attracted to men, or attractive to men. She's at the peak of her beauty. She's at the peak of her youth. Her fertility is the most it will ever be. And therefore, she's desired by all men. You, on the other hand, you don't have much leverage because you have nothing in resources to trade in exchange for her beauty. And therefore, she calls the shots and she dictates the terms. Now, this simply means that most men are overwhelmed by a woman's beauty and they accept the terms. Effectively, she is in control. And in those many few years, late 20s, early 20s to late 20s, leading up to the 30s, a man's ego is beat into the ground. You give up everything that you ever had, or something that defined who you are, your passions, your hobbies, your things you did. Now, let me give you a good example. Many years ago, I visited a friend. He had just got married. I disapproved of, in many ways, of certain behaviors that I observed before the marriage in the woman. There was a need for control, and it was not directly control. It was somewhat of a quite manipulative and vindictive. I remember this particular occasion because I had arrived at their home. He was very excited, quite happy. He wanted to take me out, all of us out, to a restaurant, and an argument broke. An argument ensued, and I couldn't understand the purpose of the argument. The reason was he had chosen a restaurant which he thought would be suitable and one that I would enjoy. She disagreed with the choice. She wanted somewhere else. But what I noticed was not something that was occurring in that relationship at that point in time. I was observing something that had actually taken place for years. She had always bullied her way through the relationship. If she didn't get what she wanted, she withheld affection, she withheld sex, she wouldn't even speak to him. And this happened on this particular day. She started to throw a tantrum. And being the loving guy he is, he started to play with her, just to say, it's okay, we'll go to the restaurant. And she made such a scene, we ended up not going out to the restaurant. Now, we left the house, we were driving to the place, and it just became so unnecessary, put it that way. So we came back home. And I remember coming back home to their home, and I thought to myself, never again. I should have stayed in a hotel, or I should have stayed in a service department. Because I was observing a friend, a loving friend, being treated in a very poor way. And the argument was over nothing. It was so trivial, it didn't make sense. Now, she didn't speak to him all through that day, all through the night. I started to observe something else. Whenever she didn't get her way, she would withhold sex as a punishment to him. So he had been conditioned to always do what she wanted. In any case, I said nothing, but I left that house and I said to myself, it would take something significant to bring me back to that house. I didn't visit that house for at least 6 years. Every time I wanted to see him, we met outside of his house. Reason was simple. Um, I noticed that the man I knew, um, in many ways, was being bullied in his own house in a subtle way, because he made one mistake, which is what I hope most of you young men will take up from this conversation. He ceded territory very early in the relationship. And here is an advice, one that you can take to the bank. Never cede territory. Bullying can be quite subtle. Many ways, women talk about abuse from men, physical abuse and emotional abuse. And my observation has been that in most of the cases, sometimes the bullying is coming from the other side. Women, once you're married, you have a monopoly in sex. He's made a vow. All of the things that you were given before the relationship was officially made into a union. You stop doing, and you start to treat him in a very poor way. Firstly, you tend to give up all his toys, all of his games, all of his hobbies. You dictate when he has sex. You dictate who comes to the house. You dictate which friends of his can visit. You dictate when he goes out, how long he can be out, and he has to come back. Effectively, you control his life. My observation has been that behavior is very subtle, and in my opinion, it's nothing short of bullying. So here's the question. As a man, how do you overcome all of this? Well, I would say my opinion is quite simple. If you follow the tenets I've given you, wait until 30, wait until 35 before you actually get married, or move in with someone, or start an important relationship. By then, you would have some confidence. You would have developed your self-esteem, your self-identity, your self-concept. You'd be self-assured. Self-confidence is a product of discipline. In order for you to have a vision, your vision is birthed from discipline. The discipline creates confidence because it creates small daily successes. But it also creates failures that are small, that you've overcome, that reinforce your ability to persevere. By waiting to 35, you've come into your manhood, and therefore, and here is the advice, you can be upfront from day one. You can say, this is who I am, this is what I like.